First is Dr. Joel Kovel, who has occupied the Alger His Chair of Bard College for more than 20 years. He is with the Committee for the Open Discussion of Zionism and has several publications on the subject, including his latest book, Overcoming Zionism, which I strongly recommend you read. After 20 years, Bard College has just informed him that his contract will not be renewed, apparently because of his outspoken positions on this issue and others. In fact, Carrie Nelson, the president of the American Association of University Professors, wrote this about Joel's dismissal. She said, quote, "As president of the AAUP, I am concerned about the recent termination of Professor Joel Kovel from an appointment at Bard College. His length of service under yearly contracts would appear to grant him an expectation of continued employment under AAUP rules. If pedagogical issues are at stake, opportunity for remediation would be appropriate. While further investigation may be necessary, there is also reason to be concerned that politics, namely his outspoken positions and publications about the Arab-Israeli conflict, may have played a role in this decision. Given that an allegation of a violation of academic freedom has been made against Bard, Professor Kovel is entitled to a full and impartial hearing on that specific charge." Dr. Kovel will speak on the internal degeneration in Israel stemming from the contradictions of Zionism and the growing militant opposition to Israeli politics. Joel Kovel.
Thank you, Christine. I will not be talking about the Bard situation because that's for later, if you like, except to say that its significance is determined in significant measure because of the juxtaposition of these events at Gaza and the global outrage, an outrage which I say to my eternal shame and disgrace was not shared at Bard College, which did nothing at all to protest the invasion of Gaza, and that's kind of what pushed me over the edge, frankly. Don't want to be oversimple, but we can take that up later if we like. What I want to talk about is the larger picture here, and I think that Christine, in her opening remarks, moved very much in that direction. I want to emphasize that Israel is not a normal state. I don't know exactly what a normal state is, but each state has a certain inner trajectory built into it, a certain inner logic. And Israel has a propaganda system which enables it to pretend that it is a normal state. It cuts deals, it has treaties, it goes here, goes there. It tries to pretend that it is part of the community of nations, but in reality it is not part of the community of nations. It is a very aberrant, peculiar, destructive, and nihilistic state, and the historical record amply documents this. And I want to talk a little bit about the mainsprings of that, because I think if we don't appreciate that, then we're constantly doing, brush fire management. We're trying to, bring it to heel there, make it nice, have a little, lull in the action, all of which is necessary. All of which is necessary, but none of which is sufficient. So I want to just have you think of the difference between Israel now and what it was at the moment of its foundation. Now, at the moment of its foundation, it had the basic DNA, you might say, of its aberrant statehood, but it also inherited and seemed to embody not only but even the great emancipatory legend of Western civilization. It was seen as a profound national liberation movement, and of course it occurred in the shadow of the immensity of the Holocaust, which was so devastating to the Jewish people, and of course many other people, but nonetheless the Jewish people of the European nations. Now, much can be said about that, but I want to emphasize not only that Israel began its life as a national liberation movement, but it began its life as a socialist government. There was opposition for the United States to take it under its wing because the right-wing powers in the U.S. didn't want to get too close to what seemed to be something that was inherently subversive. There was jockeying back and forth with the Soviet Union for the favors of Israel. The nascent Israeli state had, at that time, although it was based upon a Western model, it was still in the Middle East, the most equality of any nation, the least difference between the richest fifth and the poorest fifth of its population. We're talking now about 1948 to 1950, austerity, a kind of heroic narrative, and this great mythic force that has been axial in Western civilization that comes from the Old Testament, and the notion that we were slaves in Egypt and that we were, we found our freedom, and the freedom of the Jewish people could be the freedom of all people. Now, this was the myth, and this is not the reality. Obviously, the reality is very different. The reality, Justine started saying, as we must never, never forget, the reality is grounded in the logic of Zionism. Zionism is by no means the only solution to the dilemma of Jews in the modern world. And indeed, up until the Holocaust, there was a minority solution, because many Jews were fighters for freedom and justice, but some, a small sect, you might say, had the notion that the Jews could find national liberation in a homeland in historic Palestine. And in doing so, it was conveniently forgotten that there were people living there who would have to be gotten rid of if that homeland takes place. And that myth of liberation was therefore imposed by the destruction of an indigenous society, as has been pointed out, is also the case in the U.S., but with certain differences. We don't have time to go into them all, but we should keep them in mind. The fact of the matter is that this country is not a normal state because it is fundamentally tied to the logic of ethnic cleansing and the removal of everything non-Jewish from the land of Palestine. So the horrors of the invasion of Gaza are not sui generis. They are extreme, and in a way that I'll talk about in a moment, but they are only one episode in a book of constant displacements, whether it's administrative, whether it's economic, whether it's a caterpillar bulldozer knocking down a house here and there, or whether it's any one of the various wars and invasions. Now,